Hi, this is Cliff Holmes from thegospelblog.com, where proven ministry leaders come and share their stories so you can learn from them. Today, my guest is Jonathan Malm. Jonathan is a creativity guru of sorts, and he runs a couple different websites based on creativity and creativity in the church. And, we're going to get into all that kind of stuff. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem, my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and, what you do.
Okay, well, I previously worked for a church full time. It was down in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was kind of a jack of all trades. I started leading worship. I did the sound, audio, lighting, all that good stuff, graphic design, pretty much anything in the creative realm I was responsible for. Then as the church grew, I was able to kind of, specify a little bit more on certain things. I ended up being mostly about production. Then, while I was doing that, I started a couple blogs about production, one churchstagedesignIdeas.com, a personal blog, and actually an online magazine about the creative process for Sunday mornings. And a few months ago now, I basically made the switch to full-time doing those sites. I moved up to Dallas with my wife here, and that's what I've been doing since.
So one of the things that I saw is that you believe in a holistic approach to Sunday creativity. How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think I got a chance to see it a little bit, being kind of the jack of all trades, the person who was kind of responsible for everything, realizing that, what happens in the sound affects the worship. What happens in the worship affects the message. What happens in the greeting time, all of these things really affect each other. And, sometimes we can get so segmented and we can think, okay, my little part doesn't affect anything else. And I think that really hurts the Sunday morning story. We have a flow. We're trying to take people on a journey on Sunday mornings. And that's really kind of what I think is we need to, talk about that story, what we're trying to get people, where from A to B we're trying to get people. And that's kind of my approach is I think, we need to all be working together. That's really what Sunday Mag is all about, is just, kind of all of those parts working together, everyone kind of thinking about each other, collaborating. This issue is all about collaboration. And that's really my heart is seeing, people working together well and the Sunday morning story going well.
Why do you think churches need to be concerned about that, about the A to B and everything going well?
I think we live in a very distracting culture. My iPhone's been buzzing actually while I've been talking to you. And, there's so many things that are trying to take our attention from us. Marketers are trying to shove messages down our throats to get us to buy their stuff all during the week. And I think on Sunday morning, we have an amazing opportunity to create an environment where people are free from those distractions. They can actually focus. And I think sometimes, we get so focused on announcements. Oh, we need to announce all these things. And people just slip back into thinking about what they're going to do the rest of the week. What am I going to eat after church? How am I going to deal with that person at the office that's been really bugging me? And I think, when we can really focus on this packaging, it's not about marketing. It's not about being cool or selling something. It's about helping people be free from the distractions of the week, creating an environment that's safe, that they can just kind of focus on this one thing, on connecting with God. That's why I think that's so important. It's just, creating an environment free from those distractions that's actually compelling and kind of keeps your attention.
So what have you, in your experience, seen as some of the negative aspects where a church lacks creativity? How have you seen that hurt churches in some instances?
A lot of it, I think the creative process is not just about, doing something funny or doing something clever. I think a lot of it just has to do with reaching people where they are. You consider who's in your congregation, you consider what they need. And I think a lot of churches have become irrelevant to the younger generations. They're happy playing church the way they've always done it. Mm-hmm. So they go through their, common liturgy, whatever that is, whether that's, classical liturgical stuff or whether that's just, baby dedications, their offering, their little sermon, their 4 songs, all these little things that just become our traditions. And so they just go through that week in, week out, never really considering what a next generation might need to hear and what the next generation might need to, captivate their attention. So I think, unfortunately, you have a lot of churches that don't reach the next generation. I'm not saying you need to be the hippest, most edgy culture. I'm saying you need to be considering them and considering what they're needing to hear, not, they need to hear about, the coolest pop culture items, but they need to hear something that's relevant to them. And I think so many churches lose that. They lose that next generation. So they just become a dying church, Basically, once the last member dies, the church is done. And I think I've seen too many churches that kind of fall into that.
So you mentioned, and that was going to lead to my next question, you mentioned the next generation, and you mentioned relevance, but can you elaborate on what you think the next generation really needs to hear when it comes to a church?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I think every generation has needed the same thing, and we just forget that somehow. Every generation just needs something real. They need something genuine, and that's been the case with every generation. But somehow we get that reality. When we experience Christ and His power, we get that reality. Okay, this is a real thing, and then we get satisfied with church. We start loving church for the sake of church. So we get into this kind of routine of, we have our own language, we have our own, we say, bless God, glory, hallelujah. And that's basically just a big long because we don't know what we're saying. So we get into this kind of routine, and it can quickly become about the routine and not about the relationship. And I'm not saying people don't have the relationship, but I'm saying church becomes about that. It becomes about, this is my routine. This is the thing I love to do. And I think each new generation needs a unique, real, honest approach to ministry. And a lot of times, a lot of the current generation are actually looking for the old liturgy. They're looking for, the hymns. They're looking for, the prayers that we used to pray. They're actually looking at that because it's being refreshed in a new and real way. Every one of these moves of God has been a real and honest thing. And we just kind of somehow we just slip into this tradition and this routine, and it stops being fresh, And I think that's what the next generation needs, is freshness.
So what advice would you have to someone who may try to integrate freshness into the church, or something different, or more creativity, but they is not receptive from church leadership? What advice would you have for that person?
A lot of it, it really depends on the situation, but I think you'll have people, I think you just need to try stuff. And you don't need to try crazy stuff. I think some churches make the error of going extreme. Like, okay, we need to be creative, so they just go crazy. They'll do something that's completely outside of their culture as a church. And I think it needs to be a slower process. I think you need to think of, okay, now in our message, I'm wanting to talk about forgiveness. Now, what's a unique way I can explain forgiveness other than what I usually do? Is there some sort of illustration? Is there a video I can show? There are these little small things you can do that people won't be afraid of. Because, people tend to be afraid of change, but they're not afraid of creativity. They're not afraid of something that captivates their attention. So whenever you can show them the positive, okay, I'm going to help you understand this concept of forgiveness a little bit differently. People are pretty receptive of that, especially once you see, if I'm a grandpa and I see my grandson coming to church and excited about church, that gets me excited. Whatever it takes to make that happen, I get pretty excited about that. And a lot of it it requires coaching people. It requires, considering people. You do need to consider the older generation whenever you're making this new voyage into creativity. Think, okay, we don't want to lose them. We're not trying to completely alienate people, but you can slowly start introducing things that, that won't alienate people.
So a lot of people know that you are very well versed in church stage design. And for a lot of generations, the word stage design and church don't really go hand in hand, especially for older generations. How did you get started with church stage design?
Well, we were in a very traditional building, the church I was working at, and we decided, we weren't traditional. We weren't a traditional church. So what was happening on stage and what was happening in the Sunday morning experience wasn't really matching what was happening whenever you looked at the stage and when you looked at the building. So we realized it was kind of almost, people would walk in expecting hymns, and that wasn't what we were having. So it was kind of like a disjointed story, or a disjointed picture, I guess you could say. We realized we need to update it. So we just kind of did it just to kind of match who we were as a congregation, to kind of create a little bit more, the life that was happening on stage was not being manifested on our walls and on our stage, like on our actual physical stage. So that's why we did it. I think one of the things I've learned since then is that really stage design is all about creating an environment. You're creating an atmosphere. You're taking as many different opportunities to make that atmosphere real. So, we craft our worship experiences. We plan, we practice. We create these moments that people can worship God in. And the stage is just a chance to echo that visually. It's just a chance to say, yeah, we're here, we're in this moment. It should never be about being cool. It should never be about, wowing people. That'll happen. I mean, it's okay for that to happen, but that's not your motive. Your motive is to create that environment, to capture people's imaginations, to capture people's attentions, and then say, wow, we're focusing on something here. There's something going on. It just gives you that opportunity to just be free from distractions again. And that's really what I think is the power of stage design. I think there are a lot of churches. I visited the Village Church with Matt Chandler here in Dallas. They don't do stage design, and for their culture, that's true. That's what's good. They're reaching college students, and they don't even worry about stage design. But for their culture, for what they're trying to accomplish, they don't need that. And I think you really need to be aware that your distinct culture as a church needs to be manifested on stage. So, don't do it just because other churches are doing it. Do it because you have a vision for it, because God's given you a vision for it. But yeah, I think it's a powerful tool when used effectively.
So you took your experience with stage design at your own church, and then you kind of morphed that into churchstagedesignIdeas.com.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what led you to start that site and what the site is about?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we did our first stage design, I didn't really know what I was doing. So I went online, researched. I didn't really find much information. So we did our design, and then I realized there wasn't anything out there like that. So I just kind of started publicly researching. I went and saw blogs. I saw what other people are doing. I found resources about lighting, because I didn't really know anything about that. So it started just kind of as a public research tool for me, and people started submitting their stuff and started engaging with the community, and it just kind of took over from there. Now it's just this thriving community of stage designers submitting their own works, and people asking questions, answering questions, showing their renditions of other stage designers' works. It's just kind of an exciting thing that's grown.
So what would you say to people that may believe that a church's time and resources shouldn't be put into designing a stage? That there's other needs financially or other things people could do with their time instead of designing a stage every Sunday or every couple Sundays a month. What would you say to that?
Oh, if you are leadership and you feel that way, don't do it, man. I mean, for that matter, don't do a bulletin. Don't pad your pews. Have people sit on the floor. It's really got to be what your unique vision from God is. To those that might be critical of it, this is the thing. Stage design is not a one or the other thing. I'm not going to put all my money in stage design and then not give to missions. That's just, if we're doing that, that's ridiculous. This has to be, a holistic approach here. I mean, I'm not gonna, if I'm giving too much money to my stage, I gotta stop, and I gotta give to missions, and I gotta give to the needy around my community. A lot of times, though, what happens is, whenever you are a growing church, you need to think about all these things. You need to think about the fact that your congregation does need to be engaged, but you also need to think about this other stuff. The church in Corpus Christi I was at, we made a distinct effort to actually focus on the Sunday morning experience, and we actually saw that we were giving more to missions and giving more to local community outreach as our church grew, because these things that we were doing to help people engage was growing the church and growing the funds and growing the resources that we had to give to these other things. So it's not a one or the other thing. And that's what happens so often. Someone will see a new moving light in the church, and they're like, oh, that $5,000 moving light, that could, dig a well in Africa for a needy community. And the thing is, when do you start splitting hairs? Because a lot of churches will spend $5,000 a month on bulletins and on newsletters and stuff, all these print items. you got to do what God has called you to do, and just trust that God has called you, that this is what you got to do with your resources. Yeah, so that's what I have to say about that.
So it's interesting. I mean, you said from stage and the experience that you mentioned, stage design led to a more engaged congregation, and a more engaged congregation led to growth in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm
Yeah,
understanding
I
that
mean,
correctly.
yeah, that's what uh, as a church grows, we don't need to spend as much money. I mean, our church secretary, from a church of 100 people to a church of 1,000 people, we had still one church secretary. So that income that she was getting, it didn't grow as we grew. So as we grew, we had more people giving and more money, more percentage to give elsewhere. Our percentage of giving to missions actually increased. Not, I mean, obviously our money that we gave to missions increased, but the percentage did too. You have this kind of, in economics, it's called economies of scale. You have that sort of thing as the church grows, and obviously, your goal is not to grow the church so that you have money or so that you have numbers, but each one of those people that comes to your church is a person. It's a soul, and I want to be as effective as possible, reaching as many as possible. I'm not going to compromise the gospel, and I'm not going to compromise the vision God's given me, but as I can reach more people, I'm reaching more souls, and I'm able to do more with that. So, yeah.
I think the message in what you're saying is that engagement, congregation engagement, is the thing that we all want to shoot for. And in some churches, stage design is the gateway to that, but it might not be the remedy for all churches.
No, and it's never. I mean, it's never a remedy, because ultimately, what grows a church and what engages a church is life. When people are loving one another, that will engage people. This is all just a way to kind of reflect that. It's we did stage design to reflect what was already happening in our church. We had really vibrant worship. We had really excited people on stage. It's just, it looked like they were on this dull background. So that's what all of these things, all of these little aesthetic things, they're just to reflect what's happening in real life. It's never a remedy. Creativity is not a remedy. Life is the remedy. Approaching things in a fresh way to really reach people, having an attitude adjustment. Those are the remedies. These are all just things that help reflect that.
So what are some simple things that a church could do to improve their stage?
Simplest things, man, just, I mean, obviously check the website. There's so many different opportunities, but you can get corrugated plastic, which is just basically real estate sign material. You can make shapes out of that and just tack it to your wall and then shine lights on it. You don't have to have expensive lighting. Just anything you can do to kind of change the colors. A lot of it, lighting is the easiest option. If you can get LED lighting that has color changing abilities, you can actually adjust. Whenever you have a deep, intimate worship song, you can put this nice, rich blue on stage. But then when you have more of an exciting, aggressive song, you can put orange. You can put maybe not red, but orange. You can just change the colors. And that's one of the best things. You create these canvases that you dynamically paint with light. So the actual picture, the actual piece of art changes as the service progresses. That's what I try to do in anything I've designed, is create these canvases that change as the service progresses. So it goes from this intimate moment to this exciting moment. It really can reflect what's happening in the message. So just look for opportunities to kind of create these dynamic canvases on your stage. That's what I'd tell people.
So can you describe a more interesting or unique stage design that you've seen before?
Yeah, man. Probably my favorite one currently, my buddy Denny Weinman, who lives in South Carolina now, he used string. He just used a ton of string and created this kind of translucent, ghosty design. He shined lights on it, and it just had this really interesting look. It's called String Theory on the side if you want to look it up. Maybe you can link it up on this podcast.
I'll have a link to that.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. And it was just string and wood, and then just some lighting on it. And some of the coolest designs are actually some of the simplest. Someone actually took packing tape and just made this kind of sunburst over their stage. They tacked it to this one point on their back wall, and then here are the people. And then it just kind of spreads out over the congregation, and they just lit it. Super simple, but super impacting.
Wow. So let's talk about Sunday Mag. You mentioned it earlier, and Sunday Mag is another website that you created. Can you elaborate on what Sunday Mag is about and what your purpose is with that site?
Yeah, it started. There are a lot of magazines and websites that teach tutorials, or they teach about the technology that people use for creative Sunday morning productions. But there weren't a lot of philosophical why magazines. I see a lot of people thinking they need. They go to a conference and they see 100 moving lights and smoke and LED screens and all these things, and they think that's what creativity is about. And so they throw that in the budget, and then they get all these moving lights, and they don't know what to do with them. Like, okay, great, we have all this technology and all this equipment. Now, well, what do we do with it? Why do we do it? So I really didn't want it to be a tutorial. I didn't want it to be a tech review. I wanted it to be a why from some of the leading creative people in the church industry. You can call it the industry. But yeah, so I wanted to get contributors that were, versed in all these things, in visuals and worship, and just the creative process and leadership, and in technology and forget the other thing, communication. So we just kind of have these 6 disciplines that we talk about, and yeah, so that was kind of the idea, is just to kind of have this voice of, why should we be communicating with our bulletins? Why should we be, doing visuals, doing graphic design? What should be a part of that? Is it okay to? How do we get rid of distractions? How do we work on making one Sunday morning story? All these things, and I just kind of each issue has a theme that we just kind of explore in different ways and through different voices, and just to kind of probably more to challenge thought, to kind of challenge your way of thinking about creativity in the Sunday morning process.
What has the response been like from readers?
It's been great so far. People are really excited about it. I think I've had maybe 15 unsubscribes, but we have about 3,000 something subscribers. So that's a pretty good ratio, I guess. Yeah. Every time I see someone leaving the subscriber base, it kind of hurts my heart. But it's not for everyone, and but it is. It's pretty good response, and contributors are excited to keep contributing because they love the conversations that we're starting.
What is it about experiences that you think captures people and gives them such a deep connection? Because we talked earlier about a whole Sunday experience. What is it about experiences that you think people gravitate towards and it makes a difference to them in some way?
I think this is true in every generation, but I think so much we have a media culture where we can watch things on TV. And so I can watch my favorite U2 concert, and I can kind of experience it. But man, if you've ever been into a U2 concert, actually in the crowd and a part of it, you feel like you're a part of the story all of a sudden. It's no longer something that you're just watching. And we're so used to watching stuff. We watch YouTube. But when you experience it, when you're actually a part of it, it gets into you, inside of you. And I think a big part of that experience is the story of it. We're people of stories, and Jesus knew that. He told stories. That's the way he shared these amazing secrets of the kingdom of God, is through stories. And stories just have the ability that we can just imagine ourselves in this experience. And when we can create a story, we can create this experience, this journey that people can go on. It gets into your heart because it was something real to you. It was something that you experienced. A U2 concert, you might not like U2, but then you go to one of their concerts and you're in love with U2 after that, because all of a sudden you've experienced them. You've been a part of that journey, of that story, and it's inside of you. So I think that's one of the real powers of story and of experience, is that it really reaches past just the external. It's no longer cerebral, it's a heart thing.
I completely agree with what you're saying. But what do you say to, I do believe there's a pocket of people who believes that the experience that you mentioned should just be the gospel, should just be Jesus and learning about Jesus. And that should be the only experience that we need. And it shouldn't be predicated on the music or the lighting or decorations or anything else. So what would you say to people like that who believe that the only experience that it's important that we should be concerned about is that someone is effectively preaching Jesus or not?
Oh, I agree 100%, man. Yeah, if we're telling them a story about a baseball player and it's not going back to the gospel, that's useless. But this is one of the things that I thought was cool is Jesus spoke to a culture of farmers and of a fisherman. You know, those are the words he spoke in. He spoke in terms of farmers. So he told stories about farmers. He told stories about fishermen. He told stories about, you know, the people that were in the culture.
Yeah.
But, you know, we live in we don't, you know, we have some farmers and we have some fishers, but we live in a different culture. So we need to speak in terms of, you know, waitresses and in lawyers and accountants. That's who's in our culture. So this creative experience that we're telling, we're just basically telling the gospel in a new and kind of translated way that makes sense to them. So we're no longer speaking the language of fishermen and farmers. We're speaking the language of lawyers, accountants, salespeople, waitresses.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that is a point I wish more preachers of the gospel really understood, that Jesus spoke to farmers and fishermen, and today's preacher, today's minister, we're speaking to social media experts, students, PhDs, you know, policemen, programmers, you know, a whole wide variety of people. And I do think we need to be able to speak their language and to relate to them based on what they understand. That's an amazing point.
Thank you.
So is there anything that else you want to tell me? Something I missed that you think I should know about, someone watching this should know about creativity, stage design, anything at all?
Yeah, I'd say this is one of my big encouragements to anyone who's wanting to get involved in creativity is, you know, you will fail, and that's okay. Whenever we take God-honoring risks, he comes through. You know, I mean, nothing is wasted with God. So, you know, we're going to try things. You know, if you're new to creativity, you're going to try things that will fail and will not go so well. I failed so many times at my church. And the big thing is just, you know, God will have his will accomplished. And you got to relax and be willing to fail and be willing to try. And especially leadership, you got to give your volunteers and you got to give your staff the opportunity to fail and encourage them and say, okay, so we learned from that. Now where do we go from there? So just be willing to fail, be willing to try. It's really worth it. And you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail no matter how long you've been in the creative, you know, business. If you're taking risks, you're gonna fail. But you know, with big risks comes big return. So
that's really good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me.
No problem.
Please tell people where they can catch you online, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff, websites.
Yeah, I mean, my personal blog, jonathanmalm.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Malm. And the same thing on Facebook, just facebook.com/Jonathan Malm. I try to buy up all the Jonathan Malm real estate before anyone else does. So that's where you can get a hold of me. Just search Jonathan Malm and you'll find me.
Well, thank you. And so anybody watching this, of course, you can follow the Gospel Blog at thegospelblog.com and at the Gospel Blog on Twitter and the Gospel Blog on Facebook. Jonathan, thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking to me.
No problem. Thanks for having me.